Hello, this is James Cook of the University of Maine at Augusta, and I'm recording this video to talk about facts, data, means, and conditional means. So we are surrounded by reality, and human beings have figured out some ways to characterize, to describe reality. We have figured out ideas of things like dimensions, and that the dimensions can have length, width, height, that can be measured in units, right? So we can use that, and we can use technology for measuring things to get facts about the world, like facts about books. This book is called When Asia Was the World. It's by Stuart Gordon. And we can ascertain the fact that it is by operationalizing height, meaning as we take the orientation of the book, right? Operationalization is describing exactly how we measure the height of a book. We orient it so that the letters are legible vertically, oriented as we would read them. And then we take a ruler and we put it from the bottom to the top, and we take the longest possible measurement from bottom to top, because we could go diagonal, right? We take the shortest possible measurement, right? Because that's a little bit longer. That says it's 9 inches if we tilt it. But if we just keep going till we get the shortest measurement, it turns out to be 8.5 inches, and the shortest measurement is top to bottom. So we would say it is 8.5 inches tall. Okay. Wow, we just described a fact about the world. One thing you didn't know before you started watching this video, which is that this book is 8.5 inches tall. So what? You might be saying to yourself, so what can I do with this? Not much. And it turns out that a single fact in isolation is actually typically not worth much. We're going through the example of books today, by the way, because there's something that you're used to, something you're comfortable with, you've held books before. We can move to more abstract variables later, but let's stick with the concrete. How do we turn facts into something a little bit more interesting? We decide to start to work with data. So once we think about the structure of data, and a set of data is called a data set, by the way. That makes sense. We can start to think about those qualities and those facts, and not just as they're presented in a laundry list of here's a fact, there's a fact, the third thing is a fact, the fourth thing is a fact. Fact, 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 fact. It just fills your head. What do you do with it? Nothing, because it's not organized into a system, into a pattern of facts that characterize reality, right? Research is about finding structure, organization, patterns of observed facts. So to do that, we work with a data set. The data set is your typical structure for how we do research. And at this point, I encourage you to open up a spreadsheet. Here I have Microsoft Excel. You could also use Google Sheets or Apple's, Numbers program. This is a program for working with data. There are other programs for working with data too, but this is a good place to start. The neat thing about the world is that once we decide that there is a typical object, also called a unit of analysis, the book, we discover there are other books in the world, many other books in the world, right? And that the things that we measure about one book, some characteristic like its height, is also a characteristic that we can measure for another object. This one is The Time Traveler's Wife, good novel, is 8 inches tall. This one, Understanding Research Methods by Newman and Patton and Newman, is 10 inches tall. Oh, wow, we think. Those aren't just individual facts. They are variables. Oh, It's a characteristic that could describe all books. A characteristic of a unit of analysis, the book, is called a variable. And its value is something that we can measure. Cool. So how do we think about that? Well, we could take here a column in a spreadsheet, and we could give it a label, and that is, for any book, it is its height. Oh, interesting. Okay. And then we could say for any series of books, like let's say this is book number 1, we could say that first book was 8.5. 8.5 what? Well, let's remind ourselves that is height in inches. Okay. And then we could say, oh, book number 2. Okay, this is book number 2. It has a height of 8 inches. Okay, and we could say book number 3, this one here, has a height of 10 inches. Okay. Well, there's a little bit of a problem to that, which is that pretty soon we will forget which one was book number 1, which one was book number 2, which one was book number 3. But then we could realize, oh, wait, they have other values of other variables as well. One thing we remember books by is their title. So let's create another variable. And let's remember before we forget was that the title for the first one was When Asia Was the World. For the second book, The Time Traveler's Wife. And the third one is called Understanding Research Methods. So that's another variable, title, and they have different values. Oh, cool. Okay, so look at the structure of what we have here. There's a pattern to it, okay? So if the book is the unit of analysis, right? We have 3 observations of book, and each of these rows is called a case. And each variable, each column is called a variable. And we actually have 3 variables here. Although one of them is kind of trivial, it's called kind of the index variable, book 1, book 2, book 3, where each book has an ID number, okay? And those are ones that we just have kind of arbitrarily designed. There are 2 really meaningful variables just to its right. Each column has a variable, and the values of the variable are in each cell, okay? The variable value for a case. So each case is a row, each variable is a column, and where they meet, you find the value for that variable for that case. And that is the structure of a data set. A typical data set. Now, there are more complicated data sets in the world with different structures. If we were taking an advanced research methods course, I could talk to you about relational databases. I could talk to you about social network data in which rows and columns mean something different. But this is about 90% of data in the world. Congratulations, you're looking at a data set. And most data sets are no more complicated than this. Now, we can get a lot of information from this. Okay, so we can start to think about things like, well, what level of measurement are we talking about here? So the level of measurement here is, for height in inches, is a ratio level of measurement, which means it has a meaningful 0 point, right? When something is 0 inches tall, it has no height to it. That means something. It has equal intervals between units as well. right? And so the distance between 2 and 3 is the same as the distance between 3 and 4, is the same as the distance between 4 and 5, at least if we've made a really good ruler. On the other hand, over here under title, we have a nominal level variable. There is, oh, by the way, there is order in a ratio variable as well, right? So we can say that 2 is more than 1, 3 is more than 2, and so forth. But we can't say with titles, there's no order. Okay, no order, no intervals, no meaningful zero. None of those things. It's just the names of something. Nominal is an adjective that means its name. That's its name. It's called its title. Title is a synonym for name. Okay, so let's imagine we had these 3 cases. Now, 3 cases in a data set is small, but it's great for an example. Okay, so we figured out where cases go, where variables go. The unit of analysis is describing the whole thing. We've described levels of measurement, okay, which allow us to do some things that you can do at some levels that you can't do at others. Oh, this is nice. Okay. We can also figure out other things that are maybe categorical, like type of book or genre. Ooh, that's a word. Okay, so when Asia Was the World is nonfiction, right? Those might be ours. There's fiction and then nonfiction for understanding research methods. And heck, let's come up with a 4th case. Here's one. This is called Seconds. It's a graphic novel. It's a really cool graphic novel by Brian Lee O'Malley. And let's measure that height again. So we orient it according to how we'd read it from top to bottom, and then we get the shortest measurement. So we're not going like that. The shortest measurement of height is 8 1/4, 8.25 inches. Okay. Well, 8.25, let's be precise. And the title is called Seconds, and the genre is fiction. Okay, so now you'll notice that we have 3 variables. What level of measurement is genre? It is nominal again. Those are categories. They're not ordered. There's no 0 point. There's no equal intervals. So, wow. This is a data set, right? You could imagine we could keep going. We could have thousands of them. We could have millions of books organized this way, observed this way, and the structure of the data set would be no more complicated than this, which is a really cool way to organize the many facts about the world that are around us and start to put them in a place. So we could have tens of thousands of pieces of information, but just put into 4 variables, one of which is just the index, and 3 ones are meaningful. Can you see the power of this? The power to reduce this incredibly complicated world around us to something a lot more simple. By selecting these ones, these variables to measure, we are saying, perhaps these variables are important. Now, the next thing we can do is that we can begin to make generalizations about books. Now, granted, I have not gotten a random sample of books, okay? I've taken these off of my bookshelf, and that means that they are not representative of the entire population of books, the whole set of books that are out there in the world. But if they were, imagine that they were, for purposes of argument, I could begin to calculate tendencies among books. So if I want to understand books, maybe if I want to go into book publishing, and I want to say, what is the typical height? I could look at the mean, okay? And when I look at the mean, that is a synonym, average, okay? And the average is simply the sum across cases divided by the number of cases. You've probably calculated averages before. So I would add up all the values of the variables across all the cases and then divide by the number of cases, and that would give me the average. Now it turns out that the average is something I can get here by simply typing in a formula, but I'm going to do this manually first. Let's get the total. Okay, so the sum here, the total, okay, is equal to 8.5 plus 8 plus 10 plus 8.25. I put an equal sign in front first because that tells this spreadsheet program and most spreadsheet programs that I want a number, and I'm going to give it some numbers or a formula to get a number following that equal sign. And lo and behold, it's going to do the magic addition for me and tell me that the total is 34.75. Now the number of cases, right? If each row is a case, how many rows of data do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. So the total number of cases is 4, and that means that my mean, which is also called an average, would equal 34.75 divided by 4. Okay, so the average book height for these 4 books is 8.6875. Okay, inches. Our units are inches. That's great. We could also, if we had 10,000 cases, you can imagine we would not want to create a total this way by just typing them in all again. So a spreadsheet allows us very nicely to use a command. It's called average. So equals the average, put in the parentheses, and then reference the cells. So you'll notice in a spreadsheet, each column has a letter and each row has a number. So you say, oh, I'd like a range of these numbers and I'd like the average. So we're going to start with B2 and it's going to highlight it nicely for me. And then the colon for the ending point of that range, which is B5. So, and then end my parentheses because you always do that. And it's going to calculate the mean for me. 8.6875. How nice. Okay. However, we can do more than that, right? That's kind of valuable if you're starting out in the business. You'll know, and you know, if you have a 10-inch book, you'll know that that's larger than typical. And if you have an 8-inch book, you'll know that's slightly smaller than typical. So if you're interested in saying, no, let's not be too hasty, let's not be too wild here, we want to have a pretty standard book size, you've got something to go with. But imagine that you want to do a little bit more than that. Imagine you want the average, the mean, by type, or by genre, as we call it, right? What if you think that what's typical depends on something else? What's typical for one variable depends on the value of another variable. That's what a conditional mean is. A conditional mean is a mean that varies for one variable, that varies according to the value of a second variable. Okay, it's just an average for one variable, height, that is going to be different depending on the value of a second variable, genre. It means that we're going to come up with 2 means. Okay, and so we can give this plural. So it means that we're going to have as many means as there are kinds of genres. Okay? Okay, stick with me here, right? If a conditional mean is, and get this in your head again, that the average or mean for one variable is going to itself vary according to the value of a second variable, what we would do here is that we could take all this information, right? And we could, let's highlight that and let's sort it. Imagining we could do that. Hey, look, we can. Let's sort it by genre. And we're letting our computer know that the data row has headers. Okay, now it's sorted the data into fiction and nonfiction. Okay, now we can think about a mean for fiction. What's the mean height for fiction? And what is the mean height for nonfiction books? Okay, to get that information, we're going to just calculate two different averages. For fiction books, we're going to calculate equals average of what? The range from, wherever the genre is fiction. So that's B2 to B3. And it tells me that the average for fiction and the average for nonfiction are different. Let's calculate the average for nonfiction books of height, B4 to B5. So this is not a representative data set. Clearly, it's only 4 books that I just picked up off my shelf, and yet we have discovered that there are 2 conditional means for height. That height, on average, it's 8.6875 inches, but for the fiction books, they tend to be shorter, and the nonfiction books tend to be taller. That's only within this data set, but it's a relationship between 2 variables, that as we move from fiction to nonfiction, the books get bigger. They get higher, okay, particularly. We could also study width. Are these 2 books different in width? Sure. These, right? Here's our fiction. There's a nonfiction. Oh, this is nonfiction, okay. And then, well, I don't know, is this going to bust it out? Well, we'd have to measure it. We could have a hypothesis about that, which is a prediction about the relationship that we would find in data. And then we could find out actually what's going on in data. So the only thing that is more complicated about what professional researchers do is that they have more cases, that they have more things that they observe. They have to think carefully about which ones they select to make sure that they represent the broader world and aren't just these kind of systematic, convenient samples, right? So that the sampling isn't biased, so that you actually get a good representation of books. They think more broadly about variables, so they collect more variables about the world at once, and they have slightly more complicated statistics, which are summary numbers that describe data. That's all a statistic really is. And then they think a little bit more thoroughly about it, but most statistics at their base have this kind of logic in mind. The idea that you take a measurement of something that's typical, as we'll see in future weeks, it's not always the mean, but often it is the mean, the average. And then you start to think about, well, does some condition affect the outcome height? A condition like genre, okay? So there's one variable that is associated with a different outcome. The outcome you're interested in is called the dependent variable. The condition that is associated with a differences in outcome is called an independent variable. So genre is your independent variable here, and height is a dependent variable. Height is the outcome you're interested in predicting. Genre is the thing you use to predict difference in that value, a difference of more than an inch. Meaningful if you're a bookseller. And then the other difference is that, sure, there are people who do modeling about books, because books matter. There are also people who do modeling about things like tumor size, number of months till death, given medical treatment, popularity of a candidate, whether they get elected to elected office, income, is that predicted by a person's sex? Is that predicted by a person's years of education? Is that predicted by corruption? All those things are possible variables that you could measure. And the sky's the limit. Think about a subject you're interested in. Think about something, some outcome you want to predict. That's a dependent variable. Think about the things that might influence it. Those are your independent variables. And you can, yes, have more than one independent variable. And you use a structure like this, create data, where each column is a variable, each with its own value. And all of a sudden, you are set and ready to go in the world of research.